Hey guys, tonight we sneak quietly through time into the heart of the Ottoman Empire, somewhere between the clink of copper pots and the sigh of the Bosphorus wind. You're in Istanbul, but not the one of bustling trams or ferry horns. It's the 16th century, and the marble courtyards of Topkapı Palace gleam beneath the moon. Somewhere beyond those carved doors, thousands of cooks are still awake, ladling soups, grinding spices, and gossiping about the Sultan's appetite. You can almost hear it. The steady rhythm of knives against wood, the crackle of oil in cauldrons big enough to drown in. You probably wouldn't survive a night in these kitchens, to be honest. The heat alone could melt your slippers, and one wrong spice in the Sultan's meal could mean, well, an early retirement of the headless variety. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pad softly along the stone walkway toward the Maba-e-Amir, the imperial kitchens. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of roasting lamb, cardamom and something floral, maybe rosewater. Torches flicker on the tiled walls, their reflections dancing on brass trays stacked taller than you. You notice that even at this late hour, men in flowing caftans move about briskly, carrying pots the size of baby baths. Each man wears a white turban wound precisely. Rank could be read from how neatly it was tied. There's an order here, an almost military precision. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman kitchen ran more like an army or a monastery, but everyone agrees it was one of the most disciplined kitchens in the world. Over 1,000 cooks served under the head chef, the Ser Taba. And at the top of it all sat the Sultan's tasting officer, the poor soul who risked every meal in case someone had slipped in a pinch of treason. You pass under an archway, the sound of the Bosphorus wind following you inside. The kitchen ceilings rise like domes, their chimneys tall enough to swallow the smoke of 10,000 fires. Massive cauldrons bubble on open hearths. One holds rice, another thick lamb stew, and a third, well, nobody's entirely sure. A young apprentice peers inside, shrugs, and adds a ladle of yogurt just in case. Better too sour than too plain, he mutters. You smile. Some things about cooking never change. Somewhere nearby, a copper bell rings softly. That means the Sultan is still awake. The night shift sharpens up. Everyone straightens their robes, adds an extra pinch of saffron, or brushes flecks of ash from a tray of almond pastries. If the Sultan decides he wants a midnight snack, maybe stuffed quince or melon jam, they'll have it ready before he finishes the thought. You wander past rows of hanging utensils, each gleaming in the torchlight like instruments of some strange orchestra. A few cooks laugh under their breath about how many types of spoons the palace owns. Ladles for stew, scoops for sugar, long-handled ones for stirring sherbet, and one so big they call it the moon catcher. Someone jokes that it could feed the entire Janissary Corps in one scoop. There's a rhythm to the noise: chop, stir, scrape, hiss. A lullaby for insomniacs who find comfort in order. You pause by a low marble table where a gray-bearded cook is grinding spices with deliberate grace. Every grain, he says, has its place. He's been doing this for 40 years. Once, he tells you, he cooked for 3 different sultans and outlived them all. You watch him pour the powdered mixture into a jar: coriander, cumin, sumac, and something secret. He winks. We call it the breath of angels. The man gestures to a distant wing of the kitchen complex. That's where the candy masters work. You can smell the sugar all the way from the harbor. He chuckles softly. They say even the gulls circle slower when the honey starts to boil. The truth is, Topkapı's kitchens weren't just for food. They were a stage, a laboratory, and a heartbeat of empire. Meals here weren't private. They were statements. When foreign ambassadors dined with the Sultan, every dish said something about power, elegance, and control. Even the color of the rice mattered. Historians still debate how much the Sultan himself cared for taste. Some claim he preferred simplicity, lentil soup and yogurt. Others argue that he was a connoisseur who demanded dishes from distant provinces, as if tasting the empire itself. Whatever the truth, one fact remains. The kitchens were an empire within an empire, stretching across courtyards, storerooms, and bakeries so vast they had their own fountains and mosques. Outside, the Bosphorus sighs again. You feel the air cool as you step closer to the archway, leading into the next courtyard. There, hundreds of clay jars line the walls, filled with olive oil, vinegar, and something pickled so strongly it could wake the dead. You can't help but imagine the conversations these jars have overheard. Cooks whispering about politics, apprentices dreaming of becoming master chefs, someone quietly tasting the Sultan's soup and muttering, "Too much salt." A sleepy cat slinks between the jars, tail flicking, perfectly indifferent to centuries of human ambition. You crouch, stroke its fur, and it purrs as if confirming that history, in the end, belongs to those who nap through it. You glance back one last time. The kitchen glows golden now, smoke rising lazily toward the domed chimneys. Someone hums a tune, old, sweet, and slightly off-key. You realize that, for all the grandeur, this place isn't about fear or discipline. It's about warmth, about feeding not just the Sultan, but the empire's soul. And as you walk deeper into the scent of honey, spice, and coal smoke, the palace begins to feel strangely familiar, like a dream you've had before, where the world is ruled not by kings, but by whoever controls the spoon. You walk deeper into the warren of kitchens, and the air thickens with steam. The clatter fades behind you as you enter the Ocular Dairesi, the heart of the culinary empire. You're surrounded by movement, men in long robes, their sleeves tied back with silk cords, carrying trays that shimmer like small suns. The aroma is dizzying. Lamb roasted with apricots, cinnamon-laced rice, vinegar-soaked onions. It's both overwhelming and oddly soothing, like walking through a perfume made of hunger. This is where the Palace of Endless Appetites breathes. Every day, up to 4,000 mouths are fed here. From the Sultan himself to the guards, scribes, tutors, gardeners, and even the lowly laundry boys. No one starves under the Sultan's roof, at least not if the Matba'a Amir can help it. You glance around and notice the structure. Each kitchen has its own rank, its own sacred duty. There's the Helva Hain, where sweets and medicines are born, the Hazmutfak, reserved for the Sultan's personal meals, and the Ash Dairesi, feeding the palace staff. Somewhere down the corridor, a boy carries a platter taller than he is. Someone barks at him. Not that way. Those are for the Janissaries. He freezes, spins, and vanishes into the smoky corridor like a ghost of starch and panic. Historians still argue whether this organization was culinary genius or pure bureaucracy, but it worked for centuries. The Ottoman kitchens were clockwork, powered by fire. You follow the rhythm of the day. Before sunrise, apprentices scrub pots, polish copper lids until they gleam like sunrise itself. By noon, the fires roar, the great cauldrons hiss, and the first trays are dispatched to the outer courts. Each dish travels with a written note. What it is, who it's for, how it's seasoned. Food here carries paperwork. It's government cuisine. You imagine the Sultan's table, laid on cloths embroidered with gold thread, porcelain dishes from China, silver spoons from Venice, every detail calculated. Even the napkins are perfumed with ambergris. And yet, not everything is luxury. At the edge of the courtyard, a group of cooks kneels by a steaming pot, ladling out bowls of barley soup. This is for the workers who build, clean, and sweep. The soup is simple: barley, onion, a little butter. But the way they savor it feels sacred. One of them looks up, grins, and says, If it's good enough for the Sultan, it's good enough for me. You take a sip. It's rich, earthy, oddly comforting. The palace kitchen mirrors the empire's soul, structured, ambitious, full of contradictions. There's excess and equality in the same spoonful. The Sultan dines on pheasant glazed with honey, while his guards eat chickpea stew, both cooked with the same devotion. You pass a small room lined with ledgers. A clerk sits at a low desk, feather quill scratching furiously. He's recording every item consumed that day. 200 eggs, 60 kilograms of lamb, 10 baskets of figs. His handwriting is elegant, like calligraphy in motion. You glance closer and notice one odd line. 6 whole geese, 1 missing. He sighs. Cats, he mutters. You both know he's probably right. Every morsel in the palace is accounted for, but the cooks still find ways to slip in small acts of rebellion. One might sneak an extra pinch of salt into a friend's stew, or hide a bit of pomegranate syrup for later. You sense a quiet joy beneath the discipline. These aren't just workers. They're artists, priests of flavor. You stop near a fountain built for washing hands before meals. Its marble edges are worn smooth, and the water hums softly as it falls. A young chef is sitting beside it, wiping his brow. He glances up at you and smiles. They say the kitchens have more secrets than the treasury, he whispers. You can lose yourself here and never want to be found. He's not wrong. The Matba-e-Amir is practically a city within a city. Over 300 rooms, 10 chimneys, countless passageways. There's even a bakery so large it could bake bread for an army, because sometimes it did. As you wander, you notice something peculiar. Every corridor smells different. One is heavy with vinegar and garlic, another with cinnamon and melted sugar. It's like walking through time zones of taste. You catch yourself smiling. It's absurdly organized chaos, the kind of system only centuries of obsession could produce. Historians still debate how many cooks were truly employed here. Some say 200 towers. Others swear it was closer to 2,000 during the height of the 16th century. But they all agree on one thing. No empire on earth fed its people like the Ottomans did. Not Rome, not China, not France. The palace kitchen was a beating heart, pumping flavor through the veins of an empire that stretched from Budapest to Baghdad. One cook shuffles past, muttering, "The Sultan's appetite is endless." His colleague snorts, "So is the laundry." They both laugh quietly, and you realize humor is the only seasoning that never runs out here. You find a quiet corner where sunlight filters through a lattice, painting patterns on the floor. The sound of chopping fades to a murmur. For a moment, you just listen to the low hum of the empire at work. Every sizzling pot, every whispered order, every heartbeat of the palace kitchen tells a story of discipline and delight. You close your eyes. The scent of butter and smoke mingles with distant call to prayer. You think about how these cooks, unknown, uncelebrated, sustained sultans, armies, and dynasties, and how every spoon they lifted shaped history. When you open your eyes, the light has changed, warmer, softer. The day shifts toward evening, and a bell rings once more. Somewhere far down the corridor, trays are being lined up for the Sultan's supper. The empire is hungry again. And you, standing there amid the quiet chaos, realize this isn't just food. It's faith, hierarchy, and hope simmering in the same pot. You take one last breath of spice-heavy air. The faint sweetness of cinnamon clings to your sleeve as you turn the corner, following the aroma that leads deeper into the story. Toward the spice roots themselves, you follow the scent before you see it. It's faint at first, warm, sweet, with a whisper of something that tingles your nose. Then, like walking into sunlight, it hits you fully. The spice chamber. A place so fragrant that even centuries later, people swear the walls still hold the memory of cardamom and clove. The chamber sits behind thick cedar doors, carved with tulip motifs and locked with a bronze latch shaped like a pomegranate. You push gently, and the air inside greets you like an embrace, dense, golden, alive. There's cinnamon from Ceylon, nutmeg from the Banda Islands, saffron from Persia, pepper from India, and coffee beans that still seem to breathe the heat of Yemen. You take a step in, and your sandals slide slightly on the fine dust that coats the floor. It's spice powder, centuries of it, ground into the marble like incense. You can almost taste the history in the air. At the far end, a man in a deep red robe is counting small brown buds one by one. He's the Baharat Ah, the master of spices. He glances up at you with weary amusement. Each clove, he says, is worth a coin. Lose one, and you'll feel it in your next lifetime. You nod. He's only half joking. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans truly controlled the spice trade or merely perfected the art of using it. But within these palace walls, every grain was a treasure. Saffron threads were locked in chests and sealed with wax. Cinnamon bark was counted by the inch. Peppercorns had their own ledgers. And somewhere in another chamber, a junior clerk was tasked with sniffing each batch to ensure it wasn't stale. Imagine writing that on your resume. Professional pepper sniffer. The empire's reach stretched across 3 continents, and the kitchens were its map. Ships from Alexandria carried sacks of cumin and coriander. Caravans from Baghdad arrived heavy with turmeric and dried lime. Merchants from Venice unloaded crates of sugar so white it looked like marble. The palace didn't just consume spices, it curated them. You watch as the master of spices pours a trickle of saffron into a small bronze bowl. The filaments glow like captured sunlight. "For the Sultan's rice tonight," he murmurs. "He likes it golden." He stirs slowly, reverently, as though the spice might disappear if handled too fast. It's easy to forget that behind every sumptuous meal is an entire network of danger and daring. Those saffron threads might have crossed deserts and seas. Hidden beneath bolts of silk, guarded by men who risked their lives to keep them from thieves or tax collectors. Somewhere a camel driver in Yemen is missing 2 fingers from a bandit's raid. And here in the heart of Istanbul, the spice dust settles quietly on your sleeve. You lean closer to one of the cedar shelves. A jar labeled ambergris sits there, gleaming pale and mysterious. You hesitate. "Whale?" you ask. The spice master nods. "Whale." He smiles faintly. "We put it in sherbet for fragrance. You won't like it." He's right. You don't. It smells like the ocean arguing with a perfume shop. Still, it fascinates you. How humans can turn anything into flavor. Even strangeness becomes comfort when mixed with honey and thyme. In a corner of the room, 2 apprentices are debating in hushed tones. One claims cloves cure toothache. The other insists it's superstition. Historians still argue whether the Sultan's physicians really believed that. The elder says dryly, not looking up from his scales. But they certainly charge like they did. There's a rhythm to their work. Weigh, grind, seal, repeat. The sound of pestles on stone becomes hypnotic. A pulse that echoes through the chamber. You close your eyes for a moment. It's like standing inside a heartbeat made of spice and smoke. The Baharat Ah leads you to a narrow window slit. Beyond it, the harbor glimmers faintly under moonlight. "That," he says, pointing toward the faint silhouettes of ships, "is where the world enters the palace. Every crate is a story. Cinnamon carries news from the south. Pepper tells you how the monsoons went. Saffron whispers about wars in Persia." You look out at the faint waves, and for a second, you imagine the ships, tall masts creaking, sailors hauling ropes, sacks of spice swinging like pendulums between worlds. The journey from Spice Island to Sultan's table takes months, even years. Some ships never make it, yet somehow the flavor always arrives. The master of spices chuckles softly. "They say there's more truth in a grain of pepper than in a politician's speech." You can't help but laugh. Then maybe we should be governed by cooks. He raises an eyebrow. Oh, we already are. You wander deeper into the chamber. The walls seem to breathe with you. Each jar is labeled in Ottoman Turkish, Persian, and Arabic, a reminder that the empire's appetite spoke many tongues. There's one curious jar near the back, unlabeled, sealed in wax. You ask about it, but the spice master shakes his head. That, he says, is for the sultan's sherbet. The recipe is secret. He leans closer. Some say it's made with crushed pearls and dew gathered from the palace gardens at dawn. You wait for him to laugh. He doesn't. You think about the absurdity of it all. The sultan could have anything: gold, gems, armies. And yet what delights him most is the shimmer of flavor, the illusion that power can be tasted. Maybe that's the secret the Ottomans understood. Conquest fills borders, but only flavor fills the soul. As you turn to leave, the spice master scoops a small pinch of something golden and presses it into your palm. For luck, he says. It's ground cardamom. You lift it to your nose, and the scent floods you with warmth. For a heartbeat, the centuries collapse. The same spice that once perfumed a sultan's sherbet now rests in your hand. Outside, the courtyard air feels lighter, almost sweet. The wind carries faint traces of cinnamon and pepper. You realize that this isn't just history. It's aroma suspended in time. You tuck the cardamom into your pocket and keep walking. Somewhere ahead, a pot of soup begins to simmer. And for the first time tonight, your stomach growls back at history. You follow the scent of warmth. It's not spice this time. It's comfort. The kind of smell that feels like being wrapped in a blanket woven from memory itself. You round a corner and step into a long hall where massive cauldrons bubble gently, each releasing small sighs of steam that shimmer in the torchlight. This is the Korba Hain, the soup kitchen. The word chorba itself feels soft when you whisper it, like the beginning of something kind. Here, soup isn't an appetizer. It's the opening prayer of every Ottoman meal, whether you're a janissary or a sultan. You can tell the importance of the dish just by how reverently it's treated. A young cook ladles the thick broth into a shallow copper bowl, then tastes it with a wooden spoon. His face relaxes. Yes, he murmurs. That's peace. He glances at you and smiles, steam curling around his beard. You know, they say the empire began and ended with soup. You laugh, but he's serious. Historians still argue whether this is poetic exaggeration or fact. But one thing's certain. Soup united the Ottoman world. From the palaces of Istanbul to the caravanserais of Anatolia, everyone began their meal with a bowl of chorba. It was nourishment, symbol, and diplomacy in liquid form. You watch him stir. The smell is deep and grounding. Lentils, onions, a touch of mint, and the faint earthiness of butter browned just to the edge of nuttiness. Somewhere behind you, a porter carries a tray of bowls, so hot the rims glow faintly in the firelight. Careful, someone calls. That's for the sultan's table. You edge closer to one of the giant cauldrons and peer inside. The soup is golden and thick, swirling lazily like sunlight in slow motion. You catch the scent of lamb bones and barley. Keşkek, the cook says proudly, for the guards. They say it gives strength to the arms and patience to the heart. He leans in conspiratorially. And maybe a little heartburn too. The joke is gentle, almost affectionate. Here, food is humor's best friend. The cooks tease each other, debate whose mother makes the best lentil stew, and trade rumors about which foreign ambassador spilled his soup at last week's banquet. You realize that for all its imperial grandeur, the Ottoman kitchen runs on laughter almost as much as spice. The cook gestures toward a smaller pot, simmering quietly in the corner. That's for the sultan himself, he says, lowering his voice. Plain chicken broth tonight. He's fasting. He shrugs. Even rulers get hungry for simplicity sometimes. You taste a spoonful of the lentil chorba. It's thick, soothing, slightly smoky. You can feel the warmth travel down your throat, spreading through your chest. Perfect, you say. The cook grins. It's not perfect, he replies. It's patient. There's a kind of philosophy here. Soup teaches humility. Every ingredient dissolves into the others until no one part is more important than the rest. It's democracy in a bowl. Perhaps that's why even the Sultan begins his meal with it. Because power, too, must start with balance. A gray-bearded chef named Mustafa joins you, carrying a small wooden ladle worn smooth by decades of use. I started here when I was 12, he says proudly. They said if I could make soup that didn't boil over, I'd live to see old age. He waves the ladle like a scepter. I'm still here, aren't I? You glance around. The kitchen is alive with soft motion, steam rising, spoons stirring, boots shuffling on the stone floor. No one rushes. Everything happens in its own time. Mustafa leans against a counter. Did you know, he begins, that the Sultan once sent a bowl of soup as a diplomatic gift to the Shah of Persia? You blink. Soup? He nods. In a golden container, sealed with wax, it was said to carry not just flavor, but peace. He chuckles softly. Though by the time it arrived, it probably carried mold. You both laugh quietly. The idea seems ridiculous, but in the Ottoman mind, even a simple dish could speak louder than armies. He ladles another bowl and hands it to you. Here, this one's called yayla korbası, the soup of the highlands. Yogurt, rice, mint, tastes like mountain air. You sip it and he's right. It's clean and light, like breathing on a hill after rain. Historians still debate how these soups traveled through the empire. Some claim they followed soldiers. Others say they spread with pilgrims on the road to Mecca. But somehow, wherever the Ottomans went, shorba followed. It was the edible thread that stitched the empire together. As you drink, you notice a small brass plaque near the door. It reads, "No one leaves hungry." The cook sees your gaze and nods. We feed everyone, even the cats. He gestures toward the corner, where 3 cats sit neatly in a row, waiting like well-behaved courtiers. Someone pours them a small bowl. The cats begin lapping without a sound, tails curling in approval. The warmth, the humility, the quiet humor, it's all there in this one space. You can't help but feel that the soup kitchen holds more wisdom than any council chamber. It's not just about food, it's about connection, about the idea that no empire, however vast, survives without care. You lean back against a cool stone pillar and close your eyes for a moment. The rhythmic stirring and gentle murmurs become a lullaby. The fire pops softly, releasing a spark that drifts upward like a tiny red prayer. Somewhere above, in the dark palace corridors, the Sultan's dinner is being served. But down here among the cooks and cats, something deeper is being fed. The quiet understanding that nourishment is power and that warmth can rule longer than fear. When you open your eyes again, the cauldrons are still bubbling, the air still thick with comfort. You take one last sip from your bowl, and for a brief moment, you taste eternity, soft, savory, and simple. A bell rings in the distance. The cooks begin to clean, moving in slow, contented circles. The fire fades, leaving behind a glow like memory itself. You set your bowl down gently, the clink echoing softly across the chamber. Then you turn toward the next hall, where sweetness, not salt, rules the night. The air changes again as you step through the archway. Lighter, sweeter, and somehow more dangerous. You're entering the Helvehane, the confectionery wing of Topkapı. This is where sugar becomes alchemy. And even the most serious chefs start behaving like children with secrets. You can smell it before you see it. Honey bubbling low in copper pans, rosewater thick as perfume, toasted nuts, sesame, and that faint smokiness of caramel right before it hardens. A sound hums through the air, the gentle rhythm of wooden paddles stirring syrup, and somewhere deeper inside, the crystalline ting of sugar cooling on marble. The Helvehane doesn't look like the rest of the kitchens. It's quieter, almost reverent, as if everyone is slightly afraid of sugar, and they should be. It's expensive, imported, and unpredictable. Get the temperature wrong, and you don't just ruin a batch. You offend the Sultan's sweet tooth. You pass a young confectioner holding up a ribbon of molten sugar. It glows amber under torchlight before snapping cleanly in two. He smiles. Perfect, he whispers, though his fingers are red from heat. He notices you watching and laughs softly. Don't look at me like that. Every burn here is a badge of honor. On the far wall, rows of jars glimmer like jewels. Violet petals preserved in syrup, candied quince, pomegranate molasses, crushed mastic resin. Each ingredient has a story and a price that could make a merchant faint. The Ottomans didn't just use sugar for taste. They used it to display mastery, refinement, even mercy. When a visiting envoy impressed the Sultan, he didn't get gold, he got candy. You move closer to the long marble table, where several cooks are rolling small spheres of almond paste, their fingers moving so delicately, it's like watching prayer in motion. One of them hums an old tune about spring rain and apricot blossoms. He looks up and says, "You want to know the secret? It's not sugar, it's patience." Historians still argue whether the Helvehane was more kitchen or laboratory. Recipes were guarded as tightly as political treaties. A wrong formula wasn't just embarrassing, it could ruin a career. Some recipes, they say, were written in code, hidden in ledgers disguised as poetry. You think about that. Imagine a stanza that secretly tells you how to temper pistachio nougat. You watch as one chef pours rosewater syrup over layers of crushed nuts and phyllo dough. The scent rises, heady and floral. Baklava, he says proudly, fit for angels. You raise an eyebrow. And dentists, you mutter. He chuckles. Ah, yes, we made many dentists rich. There's truth in the joke. Sugar, introduced first as medicine, became obsession. Court physicians prescribed candied fruits for melancholy, rose sherbet for heart palpitations, and mastic gum for digestion. Sweetness heals, they said, until it didn't. Records mention a few sultans suffering from terrible toothaches, their royal jaws aching through the night. One doctor wrote, "His Majesty's molars have rebelled." Still, no rebellion could stop dessert. The Ottomans adored their sweets with almost religious devotion. Every festival, every circumcision feast, every diplomatic dinner ended with trays of helva, lokum, or ravani. The palace confectioners were artists in their own right, sculpting marzipan gardens, candy towers, and even tiny sugar birds that flapped their wings when heated. You pause by a copper cauldron where a chef is stirring something thick and golden. He gestures for you to taste. You dip a small spoon in and touch it to your lips. It's buttery, nutty, and floral all at once. Helva, he says softly. It's what we cook when someone dies. You look up, surprised. He continues. And when someone marries. And when a prince is born. And when the army leaves for war. He smiles faintly. Helva is how we remember that every joy is shadowed by goodbye. You stand there quietly for a moment, the sweetness lingering bittersweet on your tongue. Maybe that's why sugar feels sacred here. Not for its pleasure, but for its balance. Sweet and sorrowful at once, like life itself. At the end of the hall, a young boy sweeps up shards of hardened sugar that glitter like ice on the floor. We call this broken snow, he says proudly. Sometimes we grind it into dust and send it to the mosques for charity sherbet. You nod. Even the leftovers are given purpose. Historians still debate who first brought sugar to the Ottoman court. Some say Venetian traders. Others insist it came through Egypt. Either way, once it arrived, it never left. By the 17th century, the empire was importing tons of it each year. In a world still ruled by honey, sugar became a symbol of progress and excess. You wander past the shelves again. Each jar holds not just sweetness but stories. One is labeled rose syrup for the Sultan's melancholy year of fire. Another, sherbet for the circumcision feast of the princes. You imagine the laughter, the music, the fireworks reflected on silver trays of jelly and candy. At a side table, a cook is grinding pistachios with mortar and pestle, muttering under his breath about the new shipment from Aleppo. Too soft, he complains. We used to get better nuts before the Venetians meddled with the roots. He looks up at you. Historians will never understand. Wars aren't fought over borders. They're fought over almonds. You can't tell if he's joking. The smell grows heavier now. Sugar caramelizing toward darkness. A chef carefully lifts a pan from the fire, tilts it, and pours a shining ribbon of molten gold across the marble. It hardens in seconds, thin as glass. He breaks off a piece and hands it to you. It cracks between your teeth with a sound like frost. The flavor, burnt, bitter, then sweet. Feels like the empire itself, teetering between decadence and decay. Outside the window, the Bosphorus glows silver under the moon. You hear distant laughter from the upper courtyard, perhaps the Sultan himself finishing his dessert. Maybe he's smiling, the ache in his jaw dulled for now. The confectioners begin to clean their tools, wiping each pan as if it were an heirloom. One of them hums the same tune as before, a slow melody that rises and falls like breathing. You linger a moment longer, watching the last tendrils of steam twist into the air, carrying away the night sweetness. And as you turn to leave, you realize something simple yet profound. In this empire of swords and silk, it is sugar that truly rules the heart. The sweetness fades behind you, replaced by a darker, richer scent. Something smoky, almost alive. You follow it down a narrow hallway lit by oil lamps until the air itself starts to hum with energy. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. Roasted coffee. You've reached the Kavahani, the coffee chamber, a relatively new addition to the palace in the 16th century, though by now it's become an obsession. Even in the quietest corners of Topkapı, the fragrance seeps through the stone like gossip. A servant walks past carrying a copper pot no bigger than your fist. It's long-necked, delicate, and steaming. He's careful, almost reverent, as though he's holding a potion instead of a drink. The Ottomans didn't take coffee lightly. It wasn't just a beverage, it was an awakening. You step closer to one of the hearths, where a young coffee master, the Kaveshi Bashi, is stirring finely ground beans into hot sand. Yes, sand. The pot sits buried halfway in a tray of golden grains that distribute heat evenly, bubbling the coffee without burning it. The liquid rises slowly, foaming, trembling on the edge of overflow before he pulls it away. Timing is everything. He catches your eye and smiles. You have to make it stop breathing, he says softly, lifting the pot and pouring its contents into a porcelain cup. The foam glistens like velvet. If it breathes too long, it turns bitter. You take a sip. It's thick, earthy, shockingly strong. There's no milk, no sugar, no hesitation. That'll wake the dead, you murmur, and he laughs. That's the idea. Historians still argue whether coffee was first roasted in Yemen or Ethiopia. What they all agree on is that when it reached Istanbul, it changed everything. The Sultan's court loved it. The clergy feared it. And the common people, they built entire worlds around it. You glance at the man pouring another cup. So, you ask, how many cups does the Sultan drink? He shrugs. Depends on the mood of the empire. Then more seriously, sometimes one, sometimes none. But the Grand Vizier, he raises his eyebrows meaningfully. Let's just say he sleeps less than his conscience. The humor sits comfortably in the air, like the aroma itself, slow, lingering. The palace coffee service is a performance. Every movement has meaning. The kahvechi basha wears silk sleeves to protect his wrists from the heat. He stirs clockwise 3 times for balance. The cups are arranged on silver trays shaped like moons, and each serving is paired with a cube of lokum, Turkish delight, to sweeten the conversation, as they say. And conversation, you realize, is the real point. The Ottomans called coffee the milk of thinkers. It fueled poets, scholars, merchants, and mystics. Outside the palace, coffee houses became the empire's new pulse. People debated philosophy, recited poetry, played chess, even plotted revolutions over steaming cups. One chronicler described them as schools without teachers, where men learn more than in any madrasa. That line didn't sit well with everyone. You lean in as the coffee master lowers his voice. There was a time, he says, when the Sultan banned coffee altogether. You blink. Seriously? He nods, grinning. They said people were thinking too much. It's true. In the mid-1500s, coffee was declared dangerous, too social, too stimulating, too equal. Everyone from fishermen to philosophers could share a table, and that, in an empire built on hierarchy, was unsettling. Some preachers even claimed that coffee houses distracted men from prayer. Others argued the opposite, that the drink sharpened devotion. Historians still debate whether the ban was about religion, politics, or the sheer chaos of caffeine withdrawal. Whatever the reason, it didn't last. People loved coffee too much. Within a decade, the ban evaporated like steam from the pot. You watch another apprentice pour the thick sludge from the bottom of the pot into a tiny porcelain dish. For fortune-telling, he says, winking, we call it fal. After you drink, you flip the cup, let the grounds fall, and the shapes reveal your fate. You tilt your head, studying the trails of brown patterns. So, what do mine say? He squints dramatically. You travel far, but you never arrive. You laugh. That's either profound or insulting. He shrugs. Maybe both. It's strange how the palace, so strict and ordered, feels freer here. The kavahane is half ritual, half rebellion. Cooks, guards, scribes all sneak in for a sip when the world feels heavy. Someone starts humming a tune from the streets below. Another answers with a line of poetry. The sound mingles with the hiss of the sand and the soft clink of porcelain. You take another sip. It's still bitter, but the bitterness feels honest, like truth brewed too long, but still worth drinking. Maybe that's why coffee became the empire's conscience. Strong, dark, a little dangerous. A scholar once wrote that a good cup of Ottoman coffee was as black as hell, as strong as death, and as sweet as love. You're not sure about the love part. There's no sugar here. But you understand the sentiment. This drink wakes you not just from sleep, but from ignorance. You ask the kahvechi basha if he ever worries about being replaced by tea. He laughs. Tea? That's for the British. We'll die with coffee in our hands. Then, after a pause, well, unless we spill it on the Sultan. He waves a hand toward a small side room. That's where we prepare kahve-i ziyafet, ceremonial coffee for guests. Only the most trusted apprentices can pour it. One tremble, one drop, and you're back to scrubbing pots with the soup boys. You smile at the idea that in this empire, a man's destiny could depend on wrist stability. As the night deepens, the coffee chamber quiets. The last pots are rinsed, the sand cooled, the smell of roasted beans lingering like a dream that refuses to fade. You feel strangely awake, yet calm, like the world has slowed to a heartbeat made of caffeine and moonlight. Before you leave, the coffee master hands you a small cup, its surface swirling with dark foam. For the road, he says. You take a sip. It's bitter, grounding, real. Careful, he adds with a grin. That cup has started more revolutions than you can count. You nod slowly. He's not wrong, because somewhere between the first sip and the last, thought itself became addictive. And as you walk back toward the main courtyard, the faint buzz of coffee still in your veins, you realize that sometimes the quietest revolutions begin not with swords, but with steam. The night air greets you like cool silk as you step out of the coffee chamber. The sweet smoke of roasted beans fades behind you, replaced by something gentler. Green, damp, alive. You follow it through an open archway and emerge into one of the Sultan's private gardens. Hidden deep within the palace grounds. The Hasbacha, they call it, the Forbidden Garden. Moonlight slides across marble fountains and glistens on the leaves of trees older than dynasties. You can hear the low trickle of water somewhere, mingling with the rustle of night insects and the faint clink of wind chimes made from hollowed pomegranate shells. You breathe in deeply. The air is thick with scent. Jasmine, citrus blossoms, and something more elusive. The faint sweetness of ripening fruit. It's the kind of smell that feels both pure and mischievous, as if nature herself has decided to flirt with the moon. A gardener appears from behind a fig tree, holding a copper lantern that paints everything in honey light. His robe is simple, his hands stained with earth. "You shouldn't be here," he says softly, but there's no malice in it. Only the Sultan and his household walk these paths at night. You nod, half apologetic. "I was following the smell." He chuckles. "Ah, yes, the smell brings everyone here sooner or later." He waves you along the path, and together you walk under trellises heavy with grapes. Some clusters glow pale gold under the lantern, others deep purple. "From Bursa," he says, "where the soil tastes like sugar. We grafted these vines ourselves." You stop beside a low stone wall where a row of small round fruits gleam like lanterns. "Melons," he says proudly, "but not just any. The Kandahar melon, sweet enough to make a poet cry. We used to send them by ship packed in ice all the way to Damascus." Historians still argue whether such melons truly existed or whether court records exaggerated their perfection. But Ottoman chroniclers wrote about them as if they were divine. One even claimed a single slice could soften the heart of a jealous vizier. The gardener laughs quietly when you tell him that. Maybe that's why we plant them near the harem walls. You glance up. Through a row of cypress trees, faint golden lights shimmer, windows of the women's quarters. The harem gardens, too, have their own orchards. You can almost imagine the laughter drifting through the curtains, the smell of orange blossoms mixing with rosewater. Here, fruit isn't just food. It's poetry, seduction, diplomacy. A night breeze stirs the leaves, and a few petals drift into the fountain. You dip your fingers into the water. It's cold, almost startlingly pure. The gardener notices. "They say this fountain runs from the same spring that cooled the prophet's lips," he murmurs. Whether that's true or not, well, historians still argue. He bends down and picks up a fallen fig, splits it open with his thumbs, and offers you half. The inside glows pink, jeweled with seeds. You taste it, and it's impossibly soft, sweet, earthy, alive. That, he says, is the flavor of patience. A fig takes years to bear fruit, sometimes a lifetime. You sit beside the fountain while he tells you about the palace's lost gardens, orchards in Bursa, vineyards in Edirne, citrus groves near Damascus that once perfumed entire valleys. "The empire was a banquet," he says wistfully. "Now the map is smaller and the fruits fewer." He chuckles, but the gardeners still dream big. He gestures toward a small walled section, half hidden by vines. "That's the Sultan's private corner," he says. "No one touches those trees except me." You peer through the lattice, pomegranates, heavy and red, bowing the branches like jewels too proud to fall. "We harvest them at dawn," he adds. The dew keeps them fresh longer. You imagine the Sultan sitting here in the morning light, eating fruit from his own garden, while scribes read him letters from distant provinces. Maybe he prefers this quiet sweetness to all the feasts and ceremonies. After all, power is fleeting, but a ripe melon, eaten at the right moment, is eternity. You ask the gardener if any fruits here are truly forbidden. He smiles. Oh yes, the black mulberries. He points toward a shadowed corner where branches twist like secrets. Only the Sultan's family eats them. We say they taste like loyalty, dark and easily stained. He plucks one and rolls it between his fingers, the juice bleeding crimson. But the cats get them anyway, he adds with a grin. Sure enough, a cat darts out of the shadows, licking its paws smugly. There's something oddly peaceful about this place. After hours of noise and flame from the kitchens, the garden feels like the Empire's exhale. You can almost hear the earth itself murmuring lullabies under your feet. The gardener walks ahead, holding the lantern low so the light grazes the path. Do you know why we plant citrus here? He asks suddenly. You shake your head. Because it confuses evil spirits. They don't like the smell of lemon. You raise an eyebrow. So it's pest control and exorcism in one? He laughs, the sound like wind through leaves. Exactly. Everything in this garden serves a purpose, even the myths. You pass a row of tall jars, half buried in the soil. Orange blossom water, he explains. We store it here until the festivals. They sprinkle it on guests' hands before feasts. It's our way of saying, may your heart bloom. You think about that phrase, how gentle and human it sounds. Empires fall, palaces crumble, but somewhere, someone is still blessing another's hands with perfume made from flowers. As you walk toward the exit, the gardener stops by a small bench carved from marble. Sit, he says. You do. He sets the lantern on the ground between you, and the shadows stretch long across the grass. There was once a sultan, he begins, who ordered a tree to be planted for every victory won, but after his greatest defeat, he planted a pear tree anyway. He said even failure deserved shade. You stay silent for a moment, letting the words settle. The lantern flame flickers, and you watch as the light bends through the fig leaves, trembling like memory. The gardener stands. You should go, he says quietly. It's almost dawn. You rise and take one last look around. The orchard glistening with dew, the faint scent of citrus in the air, the cats lounging like furry philosophers. You realize this place isn't forbidden out of arrogance. It's sacred because it reminds even emperors to be small before the soil. You thank him and start down the path. Behind you, the first call to prayer drifts faintly across the Bosphorus. The gardener bows his head, whispers something you don't quite catch, and fades back into the trees. And as you walk away, the taste of fig still on your tongue, you understand. The empire's truest treasures were never its palaces or armies, but the quiet gardens that taught it how to grow. Dawn slides over the palace in a band of pewter light, and you follow a trail of wet footprints toward the outer gate. The air is cooler here, salted and bright, carrying the distant thrum of oars. Below the walls where the palace meets the city's working shore, the stewards gather with wicker baskets and ledger books, ready to greet the morning fleet. The Bosphorus yawns to your left, the Sea of Marmara to your right, two waters leaning into each other like old friends who still argue about the bill. The first boats bump the quay with soft thuds. Men in wool caps lift crates as if they're cradling babies, and the smell, clean, metallic, faintly sweet, comes at you in waves. Silver bodies flash in the low light. Anchovy, mackerel, bonito, bluefish. You swallow, and your stomach answers like a drum. Somewhere a gull laughs in that rude, triumphant way that reminds you city birds were never raised to be polite. A steward with a waxed mustache taps his quill against a board. "Name?" he says to the first fisherman. "Selim," the man replies, eyes bright with luck. He lifts the lid from a crate and reveals a shimmering order of bluefish, loofer. Their backs the color of forged steel. The steward inhales deeply, checks the gills, then nods with satisfaction. "Still thinking about the sea," he says. That's how freshness is measured here. The fish must still be remembering the water. You learn the rhythm quickly. Boats from the Bosphorus bring the migratory prizes, the ones that travel like caravans through the strait each season. Bonito in autumn, palamute marching south like soldiers, then bluefish chasing them, mackerel threading the current, anchovy arriving like confetti. From the Marmara come the steadier offerings, turbot with diamond skin, red mullet, and the odd sturgeon rumored to have cousins upriver, where caviar is a whispered word. Historians still argue whether caviar was a palace staple or an occasional indulgence, tangled in politics with Crimean Khans and the temper of northern rivers. Either way, the ledgers don't lie today. The steward writes, 1 jar salted roe, then adds a cautious underline as if the page might get ideas above its station. A boy runs up with a clay urn. Inside, emerald water ripples around a few live fish, kept for the Sultan's midday mood. He likes them to forget slowly, the steward says, not unkindly. You think of the confectioners polishing copper as if it were gold, the soup cooks treating lentils like prayer beads, and now these men who handle fish as if each scale is a coin from Neptune's purse. In this palace, care is the first ingredient, even before salt. You trail the procession through a side gate into the fish kitchen. It's cooler than the others, the fires lower, the windows wider to let the air roll through. On a slab of marble, a cook named Chem lays out his knives like a calligrapher setting down brushes. He grins at you. "From 2 seas," he says, "we make 1 table." He gestures to the basins. Bosphorus bluefish on one side, Marmara turbot on the other. The quarrel begins now. He salts the bluefish with a flourish and lays them over a grate, the flesh seizing and then relaxing as smoke threads upward. "The Bosphorus fish eat better," he says confidently. "They chase and are chased. They taste of effort." Across the room, another cook, Zahid, sleeves rolled high, arches an eyebrow while brushing oil over a turbot the size of a round shield. "And the Marmara fish taste of patience," she counters. "Not everything needs to run to be worthy." You consider stepping between them with a diplomat's shrug. But the smell has already chosen sides for you. The bluefish crackles with that clean, sea breath aroma, while the turbot sighs buttery promises from the pan. For fairness, you volunteer as a bilateral tasting commission. They laugh and hand you 2 bites on a piece of torn bread. The bluefish is assertive, mineral bright. The turbot is silk with a secret. You nod gravely. "I vote for lunch." A clerk appears, frowning at a wet footprint on his ledger. "Who tracked the Marmara across fiscal year lines?" he groans. Nobody answers, but 3 cats stare at him with identical innocence. One of them is still chewing. You recognize the mulberry thief from the garden. Evidently, the harem orchards are not her only jurisdiction. Sam moves to a pot where heads and bones simmer with leeks and peppercorns. "Balak çorbası," he says, "fish soup. For the scribes who write too much." He skims the foam, adds a handful of parsley, then a squeeze of lemon, the vapor rising in a fragile cloud. A sip hushes the mouth in the gentlest way. Even your thoughts seem to tiptoe afterward. If coffee was the empire's awake, this is its exhale. Mainstream fact slips neatly into the steam. Istanbul's tables, palace to port, have always followed the fish migrations. When the Bonito ran, the city sang. When anchovies surged from the Black Sea, prices fell like autumn leaves. The Bosphorus, a narrow country of current and hunger, made citizens of fish and people alike. The palace kitchens, with their contracts and cold basins, were simply the tidiest mirror of the city's tidal heart. A junior cook brings over something unexpected. A shallow tray lined with grape leaves, layered with rice, pine nuts, raisins, and anchovies arranged like little silver roof tiles. Black Sea trick, he says. Rice keeps the anchovies from talking too much. You try a corner. The leaves sigh. The rice murmurs. The fish hums one clean note. You file it mentally under strange ideas that work. Right next to sherbet scented with whale perfume and soup sent as diplomacy, on a shelf sits a wooden mold shaped like a fish, used for pressing sweet almond paste into edible jokes during festivals. Zahid taps it and smiles. Once a year we serve fish to the confectioners. She says, they pretend to be surprised. Culinary pranks are a quiet palace tradition. Humor, like lemon, brightens everything. You watch Shem debone a bluefish with swift, merciful strokes. The Janissaries, he says, used to sneak fish into the barracks and fry them at midnight. The smell reached the commander's bed. You raise your eyebrows. Punishment? He grins. He ate half. The joke lands soft, like a net that was never meant to catch anything. Still, not every taste is agreed upon. Historians still argue whether a certain sultan, whispered to prefer vegetables, ever pretended enthusiasm for fish to please coastal viziers, or whether the court menus simply rotated to flatter provinces. You picture the ledgers negotiating like diplomats, one page for the Marmara, one for the Bosphorus, balance held by parsley bouquets. By noon, platters form a tide across the pass. Grilled bluefish rubbed with thyme, turbot poached with leeks, mackerel baked with pomegranate molasses that stains the pan like a happy accident. A steward steps in to collect the sultan's portion, sniffing the air like a hound sworn to justice. Sam lowers his voice. Every bite he takes, he says, tells him how the currents ran this morning. Power, you realize, is always listening, sometimes through spice, sometimes through steam, and sometimes through the silence after a bone is clean. You step to the window where the sea flickers like 1,000 falling coins. Boats peel away from the quay. Gulls scribble white signatures across the water. Down on the stones, a fisherman has fallen asleep with his hat over his eyes, a bluefish scale stuck to his cheek like a tiny medal. You wonder if he dreamt of anchors or apricots, maybe both. In this city, fruit and fish shake hands at lunch. When you turn back, the cats have convened under the cutting table, holding what appears to be a committee meeting on the equitable distribution of trimmings. You cast your vote by accidentally, nudging a morsel with your sandal. The motion carries unanimously. The bell rings. A small one, polite as good manners. Trays depart toward the inner rooms, and the kitchen relaxes by a breath. Sam wipes his knives. Zahid covers the soup. The clerk fans his ledger dry. You feel the day slide forward, the palace shifting to its afternoon key, and you catch the final whisper of charcoal and lemon, as if the kitchen itself were tucking a napkin under its chin. You touch the windowsill, damp with sea breath, and carry that coolness with you as you step into the corridor. Behind you, the debate continues in low voices, Bosphorus or Marmara, chase or patience, steel blue flash or shield white calm. Ahead, the hallway bends toward a quieter pantry, where rumors suggest the sultan's appetite sometimes chooses the vegetables. You turn the corner expecting the familiar drift of roasting lamb or a whisper of charcoal. But the air here smells like late summer. Tomatoes just blushing, basil bruised between fingers, eggplant skin kissed by smoke. The corridor opens into a quiet room with whitewashed walls, polished stone floors, and a long, low table laid with bowls in greens and golds. A steward looks up and smiles. "You've found the Sultan's gentle table," he says. "Today he's keeping to vegetables." The phrase lands softly, almost conspiratorial, as if you've stumbled into a court secret. A young cook brings in a tray crowned with an earthenware dish that glows the color of sunset. He sets it down and lifts the lid. Eggplant split and roasted, slumped in the most dignified way possible, swimming in olive oil with ribbons of onion, garlic, and tomato. He drizzles on a last sheen of oil and murmurs, "Imam Bayilda." You've heard the legend. The imam fainted when he tasted it, or when he saw how much precious oil went into the pot. Around here, both explanations count as truth. You sit as a servant places a small plate before you. Green beans stewed slow with tomatoes, teis fasuli, chickpeas in a lemony glaze, nohut pilaki, and a mound of bulgur with parsley and mint that breathes like a garden in a bowl. The flavors are quiet but assured. Nothing shouts, everything confides. Careful, the steward says with a grin. Vegetables are how the palace tricks you into eating light and feeling rich. Mainstream fact pads in Calmly Like Our Mulberry Thief Cat. Ottoman palace cuisine had an entire category called zeytinyağlılar, vegetables cooked gently in olive oil and served at room temperature, especially in warm months and on fasting days. Far from side dishes, they were centerpieces, composed with as much attention as the grand roasts. The kitchen clerks even kept separate ledgers for olive oil, because in this empire, liquid gold required its own arithmetic. You take a forkful of the eggplant and let it idle on your tongue. The garlic is sweet rather than sharp, the onions collapsed into silk, the olive oil lazy and generous. He'll have this for the noon meal, the steward says, with yogurt, herbs, and a little bread. He lowers his voice. On days like this, the meat ovens nap. Somewhere, a spit turns with a disappointed squeak. Historians still argue whether any Ottoman ruler could be called a vegetarian in the modern sense. Fasting days, health cures, and personal moods made tables changeable. 1 week fish and soups, the next, a parade of greens. Some chroniclers swear a certain sultan preferred lentil soup and yogurt most evenings. Others claim the same man dispatched messengers to fetch pheasant from Thrace. Court records, like cats, rarely sit still. A palace dietitian, tall, severe, carrying a spoon as if it were a gavel, steps in and inspects the trays. Balance, she says, tapping the bulgur. Warm grain, cool yogurt, soft oil, crisp herbs. She pauses at the plate of cucumbers, dressed with vinegar and dill. Good. Cucumbers calm the temper. She glances at you. And the temper needs calming. You nod, as if she's just prescribed statecraft. In this palace, she has. The cook returns with a shallow brass pan of lentils simmered with carrots, onion, and cumin. He adds a squeeze of lemon and a snow of chopped parsley that melts as it lands. Mercy mek yanisi, he says, for patience. He winks. And for the clerk who keeps losing fish to the cats. From the hallway, a very offended meow files an appeal. You taste the lentils. They are the opposite of coffee. All softness, no sharp edges, a steadying hand on the shoulder. Food that tells you to speak quietly and listen longer. You remember the soup kitchen's motto, no one leaves hungry, and realize this dish carries the same oath, just with fewer witnesses and more parsley. Quirky Tidbit slides in with a plate of stuffed grape leaves, yaprek sarma, lined up like tidy soldiers at rest. The stuffing is rice, pine nuts, currants, and just enough cinnamon to make your tongue ask questions. The steward laughs at your surprise. Yes, a whisper of cinnamon. The spice chamber follows us everywhere, like a very organized ghost. He gestures toward a tiny dish of sour cherry syrup meant to dab on the side. Sweet next to savory, a palace prank with excellent manners. The Sultan's taster, a man whose job description is basically, try everything and hope, appears and salutes the table with his spoon. He samples, nods, and makes a small note on a wax tablet. You lean a little closer and read the line. Eggplant excellent, lentils truthful, cucumbers saintly. You resist the urge to add, Clerk still angry. The steward sighs contentedly. People think power tastes like meat, he says, but often it tastes like olive oil and lemon. He lowers his voice. When the empire feels heavy, His Majesty eats light, says it helps him see beyond the banquet. You picture a ruler choosing restraint in a room built for excess, and somehow the walls seem to step back a pace to let the idea breathe. A maid arrives with a bowl of thick yogurt, whisked with garlic and mint, edges ruffled like clouds. She sets it beside a pile of blistered peppers. The peppers, she warns gently. Think they are important. You take a bite and immediately pretend to study the ceiling until your eyes stop watering. The yogurt forgives you with a cool handshake. Joke 2, you decide, belongs to the peppers. Historians still debate the origin of Imam Bayilda's name, whether it recorded a priest fainting from ecstasy or from arithmetic when he learned how many amphorae of oil evaporated into pleasure. The kitchen has settled the matter with a compromise. They make it dreamy enough to swoon over, but thrifty enough that the accountants keep blinking. Somewhere a ledger gives a small, dignified cough. Bread arrives, rings of sesame simit, still warm from dawn, and soft interior loaves with crusts that sing when you press them. You drag a piece through olive oil streaked with pomegranate molasses, and the tart sweet glow takes you back to the gardens. Fig, grape, citrus, patience. The garden taught you how to grow. This table teaches you how to stop. People call this a vegetarian day, the steward muses, but we call it a listening day. He gestures at the trays. Green beans that have told their whole life story in tomato, eggplant that remembers fire without bitterness, herbs that arrive like good advice. Meat speaks loudly. Vegetables speak clearly. In a corner, a junior cook bruises mint with a bit of sugar and lemon peel, then stirs it into cool water. He hands you a cup. The scent rises like clean laundry on a sunny line. For the mind, he says shyly. You drink, and thoughts slot into place the way knives settle into a wooden rack. You wonder if the empire might last longer on days like this, when hunger is persuaded rather than conquered. As the meal is plated for the inner chambers, the steward lays a single slice of melon on the sultan's tray, pale, almost luminous, a garden envoy at the end of the parade. For sweetness without sleepiness, he says, dessert that doesn't ask for applause. In the confectioner's wing, you can almost hear sugar gasp at the demotion. Don't worry, you think, there will be festivals enough. You rise, feeling lighter in that way fullness sometimes gives, the kind that comes from balance rather than bravado. On the threshold, you glance back at the quiet table, earthenware gleam, oil pooling like sunlight, herbs drifting like a soft verdict. Power, it turns out, can whisper, and as you step into the hall, you catch the faintest echo from the fish kitchen, lemon, charcoal, a gull's impolite blessing, and you smile. The palace is a chorus. Today, the melody just happens to be green. You wake to heat before you wake to sound. It comes like a sunrise made of brick and ember, rolling through a narrow lane behind the kitchens where the ovens live. The air smells of toasted sesame and warm flour. It smells like comfort that already happened and is happening again. A boy with a wooden peel bigger than himself trots past you, flour ghosting off his sleeves. He doesn't see you. No one sees anything at this hour except the next loaf. The bakers of dawn are already halfway through their day. They move in a quiet choreography, one feeding the fire, one weighing dough balls, one stamping the surface with a tulip seal, so each loaf carries a small declaration of identity. You slide closer to the long bench where hands knead in steady waves. The dough sighs under their palms. Listen, a baker whispers without looking up. It tells you when it's ready. You tilt your ear toward a bowl as if bread might gossip. It does in a way, soft bubbles blurping from the sourdough like polite secrets. Mainstream fact arrives with the first bell. In the Ottoman world, bread is regulated like sunlight. Prices and weights are fixed by imperial decree, the Neyariche, and the Bakers' Guild swears to them on pain of fines, exile, or, worst of all, public embarrassment. Inspectors roam with scales, testing loaves the way a jeweler tests gold. The baker beside you nods toward a hanging set of brass weights. Weigh the hungers, weigh the mercy, he says. Then we weigh the bread. A man named Ilyas works the oven mouth, face glowing like a saint of coals. He pulls a ring of sesame bread, simit, from a loop of iron hooks and sets it on a reed mat where it crackles like a tiny campfire. Galata flour, he says, tapping the crust. Black Sea wheat. Walked half the empire to get here. He grins. Tasted all the scenery on the way. You dare a bite. The crust shatters, the sesame pops, and the inside is a gentle tug that asks for butter it knows it won't get. Historians still argue whether simit was born in the palace ovens in the 16th century or in the street bakeries across the Golden Horn, where apprentices sold rings from poles like edible bracelets. Either way, by dawn it becomes the city's rosary. Everyone fingers a bead sooner or later. On the opposite table, a team pats out PD, oval, and wide, dimpling the dough with fingertips dipped in water. For Ramadan nights, they'll make special loaves, platter round, glossy, sprinkled with nigella and sesame, carried through streets that smell like prayers cooling. Today's version is humbler, destined for the palace staff and guards who prefer their bread to speak in bread voice and not in poetry. Quirky tidbit sneaks in on soft paws. The mulberry thief, your garden acquaintance, has diversified. She saunters through the doorway and parks herself by the sesame basket, offering a professional purr. The bakers pretend not to see her, then, accidentally, nudge a seed avalanche off the table. She blinks, as if chairing a quality control committee. Someone mutters, "The Guild of Cats has approved our output." A few flowery smirks rise like well-proofed dough. The fire breathes when Ilyas opens the iron door. A flash of orange paints the ceiling. He slides in a peel load of paidi, twists, withdraws, slides again. Movements like calligraphy, no flourish wasted. The oven is a kind of room-sized instrument. Every loaf is a note, and practice began before the boy grew his first mustache. "We use yesterday to feed today," he says, pointing to the sourdough vat, "and today to promise tomorrow." You realize bread may be the palace's quietest time machine. A clerk slips in with a slate and chalk, bleary-eyed, and begins tallying 50 pied, 40 simit, 6 trays of tiny rolls for the confectioners, who will slice them into prim squares and call it cake, possibly to annoy the sugar gods. "Don't short the soup, boys," he warns without looking up. They have ladles and opinions. The room hums with the soft laugh of people who know both are true. You lean close to the bench, where an elder baker, wrists like carved wood, turns dough by the edge. "Flour, water, salt," he says, and the stubbornness not to ruin them. He flicks a bit of flour toward your sleeve. "There, now you work here." You nod solemnly, honored, and immediately step out of the way of a hurtling tray. Joke 1 lands safely. Not all bread is the same story. In a corner, thin sheets stretch across a cushion like silk being persuaded into transparency. A young woman lifts and flips them with the calm of a scribe turning pages. This is yufka, ancestor of 1,000 layers, destined to become pastries or travel bread. Dried and stacked for journeys where soup is uncertain, but hunger is not. She smiles. "Folded sky," she says, and the phrase settles in your pocket to keep. A junior baker brings out a wooden stamp carved with a tulip, a cypress, and a tiny crescent. He presses it to each paidi, leaving a pattern that will bake into the crust like a whisper of the garden and the night sky. "So the inspectors know we are ourselves," he explains. "And so the loaves don't forget." You think of the fish steward, who checked gills for the memory of water. Here, the bread is checked for the memory of hands. Somewhere outside, a drum taps, the Ramadan drummer finishing his last round, telling sleepers to eat before dawn, brightens into decree. In the ovens, the last loaves expand, like held breath finally released. Ilias wipes his brow and looks almost shy. When the city wakes, he says, it wants bread before it wants the sun. Mainstream flows again. Palace bakeries were not only for the court. Foundations, vakuf, sponsored ovens that baked charity loaves for the poor, stacked like small moons and handed out after prayers. The empire fed itself through rules and through kindness. Both rose better with yeast. The debate arrives on cue, carried by a merchant from Üsküdar, who has brought sesame from Damascus and opinions from everywhere else. Boil first, then bake, he declares of simit, only way to make the shine. Ilias snorts. Shine is in the glaze, great molasses and water. Boiling is for bagels and people with extra time. The merchant crosses his arms. Historians still argue whether palace rings were boiled. He nods at you as if you are a tribunal. You render a Solomonic verdict. Both methods produce happiness. The guild accepts this ruling with a shrug and a crumb. A boy returns with a brass tray of tea. Yes, tea, poured for the bakers by a neighbor who insists leaves are kinder at this hour than beans. Someone says, "Don't tell the coffee masters." And everyone pretends solemn secrecy while sipping loudly. Joke 2 stretches, yawns, and curls by the hearth. You try a heel of PD dipped into olive oil and crushed thyme. It tastes like the vegetable table chose to become architecture. Another bite with honey tastes like the confectioner's briefly learned restraint. Bread does that. It negotiates truces between wings of the palace that otherwise speak in different dialects of desire. At the door, a porter loads wicker baskets, one for the sultan's private rooms, small loaves with even crumb, one for the staff halls, generous peed, one for the soup kitchen, yesterday's bread revived with steam and gratitude. He marks each with a twist of red thread. So the loaves don't get ideas, he says, or lost. Before you go, the elder plucks a single simit from the cooling rack and hangs it over your wrist like a bracelet. For walking, he says. Bread is best with footsteps. You step outside into a lane rinsed with early light, sesame ticking against your sleeve like a pocketful of tiny clocks. The city is yawning, shutters lifting, gulls already invigilating the breakfast economy. A man on a corner sings the old selling call, "Simit, simit," and the word itself is round in his mouth, a ring tossed up to catch the sun. You break the bread, hand half to the mulberry thief, and watch her trot away with the steady joy of someone who absolutely deserves this. The heat from the ovens still rides your clothes. Your thoughts settle the way flour does after a good throw, softly, everywhere. Somewhere deeper in the palace, clerks sharpen quills, fish stew rests, the spice master counts cloves like coins. And up the hill, men are hoisting tall standards and arranging carpets in open courtyards. The bakers nod toward the bustle. Feast day, someone says, the kind that walks for miles. Your heartbeat lifts, not from coffee this time, but from the sense that the kitchen is about to become a parade. You turn your steps that way, sesame trailing like confetti, ready to meet a table that doesn't end when the guests do. You follow the current of noise rising from the courtyards, bells, laughter, the thunder of trays colliding like cymbals. The air itself vibrates with the scent of roasting meat and sweet smoke. Today, the palace has slipped out of its usual rhythm and into a kind of delirious choreography. It's feast day, and everything that can cook is cooking. You pass through a stone archway and emerge into a courtyard so full of color, it looks like someone spilled a festival across the floor. Long carpets unfurl beneath the arches. Copper pots line up in military precision, and the cooks, those solemn alchemists of the ordinary days, are grinning like children. Don't blink, one of them calls to you. The food marches before the music. He's not wrong. From the great kitchen gates, the first dishes appear. Carried high on the shoulders of servers in matching robes. You count them as they go. Steaming pilaf in silver basins, skewers of lamb, towers of sweets shimmering with syrup. The line never ends. It feels less like serving and more like ceremony, a slow river of flavor winding through marble channels. A herald steps forward and calls out the menu like a poem. Each line ends with applause, the crowd cheering the arrival of dolma or sarma as though they were visiting dignitaries. One dish, stuffed quails baked in pastry, earns an especially enthusiastic roar. You ask the man beside you what's inside? He shrugs. Secrets mostly. The Sultan's table sits at the far end beneath a canopy of gold-threaded cloth. He doesn't speak, but every gesture is mirrored across the courtyard. When he lifts his spoon, hundreds of spoons rise in silent salute. You realize this is how power tastes, synchronized appetite. Historians still argue about the scale of Ottoman banquets. Some claim they lasted days, others a week. But the ledgers speak clearly. Hundreds of sheep, barrels of honey, cartloads of rice, and spices so costly that the accountants recorded them in whispers. The meals weren't just for hunger. They were political theater, diplomacy performed with pomegranates. You wander closer to a long table where a group of scribes are eating between bouts of note-taking. We record everything, one tells you, mouth half full. Even the laughter. He flips open a parchment covered in meticulous Ottoman script. Today's feast marks the end of Ramadan, the birth of a prince, and the start of a new campaign. 3 reasons. 1 stomach. He sighs. And tomorrow, fasting again. Balance, you see. A cook rushes by carrying a lamb roasted whole, the skin glazed dark and shining. Steam trails behind him like a royal procession. He sets it down, bows slightly, and steps away. A taster steps in, slices the first piece, and nods approval. Somewhere behind you, a drum starts to beat softly. Dum, 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 as if keeping time with the guests chewing. You glance at a smaller table where the palace servants eat their own meal. The dishes are simpler. Rice, beans, bread, but the laughter louder. One boy is carving a chunk of meat with exaggerated elegance, pretending to be a vizier. The others clap and hoot. You think, not for the first time, that joy requires far less ceremony than power does. The sun climbs higher, turning the copper lids into tiny suns. Trays of sweets arrive, baklava, semolina cakes, rose sherbet. Someone pours syrup in slow spirals, and a woman next to you murmurs, "That's the real currency of empire." You look around. No one argues. The smell is dizzying. Roasted pistachios, butter melting into pastry, the faint tang of lemon sugar. You remember the confectioner's wing and smile. Somewhere their burned fingers are celebrating too. The heat rises, and you retreat toward the fountain where a few old cooks are resting in the shade. One of them, gray-bearded and serene, gestures at the chaos. "I've seen 40 feasts," he says. "They all start like this, noise and fire. But by the 3rd night, it's only the soup that matters. Everything returns to the spoon." He chuckles, handing you a small bowl. It's clear broth dotted with chickpeas and herbs. "Here," he says, "our truest dish. No feast survives without it." You sip. It's familiar, grounding. The same taste from the Corbahane days ago. You can almost hear the cats purring by the cauldrons. Historians still debate the function of these endless banquets. Were they generosity or display? But sitting here, you understand they're both. Feeding others is power. Doing it beautifully is politics. Every guest leaves thinking the Sultan has tasted their soul and found it flavorful. As dusk softens the courtyard, the laughter deepens into warmth. Torches flicker. Music begins, not loud but steady. the sound of flutes and tambourines weaving through the smell of rose sherbet and smoke. The cooks, finally allowed to eat, raise cups of water and coffee. A toast of exhaustion. You watch the last tray leave the kitchen, a mountain of rice crowned with a roasted peacock. Feathers dyed and fanned wide like a jewel on fire. It's absurdly magnificent and strangely still. The steward beside you sighs. Every empire has its peacock, he says. We just cook ours. The crowd begins to disperse, slow and satisfied. A few guests lie back on the carpets, drifting toward sleep, their plates gleaming in the torchlight. You realize the feast doesn't end. It simply fades, like sugar dissolving. You walk past the cooling fires. The marble glows faintly underfoot. The last smell to linger isn't meat or spice, it's bread. Even now, the bakers of dawn are beginning again, kneading tomorrow from the leftovers of today. You pause at the edge of the courtyard, the music dimming behind you. Somewhere above, in the Sultan's private rooms, someone lifts a cup of coffee to their lips. The empire exhales. The kitchens fall quiet. And you, full of scent and story, follow the soft pulse of the palace toward another mystery waiting in the shadows, the place where medicine and dinner share a shelf. You leave the fading music of the feast and slip into a narrow corridor where the torches burn steadier, more thoughtful, as if the flames themselves have been to school. The sign over the arch reads, Exahena, the palace apothecary. And the moment you step inside, you realize you haven't left the kitchen at all. You've walked into its mirror. Jars line the walls like well-behaved soldiers. Dried rose, quince seed, mastic, sumac, myrrh, camphor, clove, cardamom, cinnamon. You could cook a banquet or cure a cough without moving your feet. In Topkapı, dinner and medicine share a shelf. A physician in a sable cap, Hekimbaşı, the chief of healers, looks up from a ledger and smiles with the tired affection of someone who loves both knowledge and paperwork. You're late, he says gently, then waves you closer to a table set with scales and tiny brass spoons. On the marble lies a prescription written in a neat hand. For sleeplessness, rose sherbet with a shaving of nutmeg, 3 sips, and a walk among cypresses. You raise an eyebrow. So, dessert? He chuckles. Therapeutic dessert. Please don't tell the confectioners. They'll start charging consultation fees. Mainstream fact arrives like a careful footstep. The Ottoman court practiced a learned medicine rooted in the Greco-Arabic traditions of Galen and Ibn Sina, speaking the language of humors. Hot, cold, moist, dry. Foods were not neutral, they were tools. Eggplant leaned cold and dry, lamb ran hot, yogurt cooled tempers, mint tidied the head. A meal could tip the body toward balance or trouble, and the palace physicians worked with the cooks to nudge the Sultan's humors the right way. On listening days, you've already tasted olive oil, herbs, lentils. The kitchen is also a clinic. The chief motions you toward a row of mortars where apprentices pound ginger into powder, as if time itself were hiding there. One boy grimaces, sneezes, and keeps pounding. Ginger for the sailors, the physician explains, and for anyone who dreams of boats while standing still. He adds, almost as a confession, also for the clerks who read while walking. You can practically hear the fish ledger groan in agreement. On the far shelf sits a familiar mystery, a small sealed jar labeled in 3 scripts with a single word, amber. You remember the spice master's warning, sherbet perfumed with ambergris, the ocean arguing with a perfume shop. Here the jar bears a second tag. For melancholy, 1 drop, provided the patient's poetry has been tried first. It's hard to know if that line is protocol or personality. In this room, both wear the same coat. The apothecary smells like ideas simmering, vinegar tinged with thyme, sugar coaxed into syrup, a memory of musk. The boundary between remedy and recipe thins to a sheen. Quince paste, Savisli Iva Marabasa, sits beside a jar of quince seeds soaked into a glistening gel for sore throats. Cooked quince warms and steadies, the physician says, but the seeds soothe. He taps the glass. One fruit, two conversations. He leads you to a low cabinet where drawers whisper, open to reveal clove buds, licorice root, and grains of paradise like tiny constellations. For toothache, he says, placing a clove in your palm. Bite gently. You do, and the numbness blooms like a polite thundercloud. We saved more royal tempers with clove than with armies, he adds dryly. You think of the helvahane, of rose syrups and aching jaws, and realize the empire's sweetest wing kept the apothecary gainfully employed. Historians still argue whether the palace healers genuinely believed in the full arithmetic of humors, or used it as a shared grammar while quietly practicing empiricism under the table. The Heckenbusche shrugs at the debate as if swatting a fruit fly. If a man sleeps better after yogurt with mint, he says, does the mint care which theory got him there? Fair point. Sleep is its own footnote. A servant enters with a covered tray from the Haas Mutfak. The lid lifts to reveal chicken broth shimmering with rice and lemon, terbieli chorba. Fever and fretfulness, the physician declares, and instructs a scribe to note the dose. A bowl and a conversation. You catch the recipe with your nose. Stock, tempered egg, a squeeze of citrus. The kitchen speaks humbly. The clinic listens. You remember the soup cook saying, "It's not perfect, it's patient." And the line clicks into the apothecary like a key. On a side table, little pellets rest on a sheet of paper dusted with sugar. Coriander pastilles, an apprentice explains, for nervous stomachs during audiences. He leans closer. We roll bitter pills in sweet coats so courtiers won't make faces in front of the Sultan. Medicine, meet manners. Somewhere, a confectioner raises a burnt finger in solidarity. The room also keeps its menagerie. A cat dozes on a bundle of dried valerian root, completely surrendered to the plant's lullaby. The physician nods at the puddle of fur. An infallible assay, he says. If the cat won't move, the batch is good. He makes a note. Valerian, approved by the Guild of Cats. You try to keep a straight face and fail. Joke one pads off with dignity. A courier arrives, winded, bearing a letter from a provincial governor with a list of remedies that have worked wonders in the mountains. Pine resin lozenges, sour cherry skin for throats, and, your eyes widen, powdered pearl for the melancholic rich. The Heckenbusche sighs without looking up. Pearl is expensive sadness, he murmurs, shelving the letter under a harried paperweight. You remember the spice chamber's rumor of crushed pearls in sherbet. Apparently, the habit wandered between rooms like gossip in new shoes. He turns to you with a spoonful of pomegranate molasses, nar ecstasy. Taste, he says. It is dark, tart, clarifying, like a bell rung for the palate. For thick tongues and thicker meetings, he adds, cuts heaviness after too many sauces. You picture the banquet peacock turning its jeweled head, offended. Balance, you think, is a quiet revolution repeated with utensils. The physician pauses by a brass ewer, where thyme and vinegar steep, like a thought that hasn't quite introduced itself. We call this a circumsuben when we sweeten it, he says, vinegar and honey, mixed into a cooling drink. For heat and headache. He smiles. Also for courtiers who insist they are perfectly fine. You nod. Denial is a recurring ailment in palaces and kitchens alike. In the corner, a small book rests open, a formulary half in poetry, half in mathematics. Our remedies, the Heckenbusche says, wear many clothes: sherbet, paste, pill, compress. The body is stubborn. We must be charming. He picks up a brown glass bottle and sniffs. Mastic water for the breath, sumac for the throat, cinnamon for the gloom that refuses to leave by the door. He glances up, and if all else fails, a walk in the garden at dawn. You picture dew on fig leaves, the gardener's lantern, the mulberry thief's judicial tale. Perhaps the garden was always part of the pharmacy, just outdoors. Quirky tidbit winks from a shallow bowl of tiny black seeds, nigella. An apprentice recites a proverb with theatrical solemnity. The seed that cures everything but death. He looks smug. The physician looks amused. It cures many things, he corrects, and encourages the rest. He sprinkles a pinch into yogurt with garlic. Suddenly, a condiment becomes counsel. You ask about coffee, that black conspirator. The Heckenbasha folds his hands. As medicine? Yes, at the right hour, for the right mind. And sometimes no, for the same mind at the wrong hour. He permits himself a small smile. Historians still argue whether we banned it for the soul or the Senate. I argue we banned it for sleep. He gestures toward your eyes. Yours, for example. Guilty. A low rhythmic tap interrupts. A leech jar, the creatures moving like commas in inky water. The apprentice offers a nervous grin. They prefer the noble wrist, he says. You take one step back and bump into the shelf of clove. The physician rescues you with professional mercy. Leeches have their place, he says. But not every sentence needs more commas. Joke 2 sticks to the jar and slides away. By the window, 2 cooks in aprons confer with a magician in ink-stained sleeves. They're plotting a menu for a convalescent official. Barley broth with dill, rice pilaf washed 3 times, stewed apples with a thread of cinnamon. No peacock, no speeches. The list sounds like a lullaby that remembers the stove. You realize the palace has been doing food as medicine long before hashtags and specialty cafes, mostly because the empire can't afford rulers who oversleep or overthink. The Heckenbasha closes his ledger and ties it with a ribbon the color of pomegranate flesh. Eat gently, he says, almost to the room. Sleep when the cats advise it. Walk before arguments. And remember, balance is not a destination. It is dinner. You step back into the corridor, carrying a faint cloud of clove and thyme around your sleeves. The kitchens hum somewhere to your left. The garden breathes to your right. Between them, this room keeps the empire from tipping. You think of soup diplomacy, of bread regulations, of fish that still remember water, of vegetables that whisper, of sugar that forgives, each a small correction on history's tall ledger. At the end of the hall, a lamp flickers low. You turn toward a staircase that climbs toward a softer world, the rooms behind the curtains, where women trade recipes like letters and pastry like promises, and where rumor says a perfectly made sherbet can sweeten a difficult conversation faster than any decree. The air lifts a little, like a page about to turn. You climb a narrow stairwell that smells faintly of pastry and perfume, the 2 great forces that move most hearts in the palace. The corridor opens into a quiet hall, draped in pale curtains, the women's quarter, the Harem-i Humayun. The air here is softer, muffled. You can hear laughter behind latticed screens, the clink of spoons on porcelain, a note of oud drifting like a secret. You pause at the threshold, unsure if you're trespassing, but an elderly woman waves you in with a smile. If you've come looking for food, she says, you're always welcome. The men below think they rule the kitchens, but they forget who raises the future rulers. She winks. Come, we're making burek. The harem kitchen is smaller than the grand matbah, yet it feels more alive. Steam curls like gossip around low tables, where young women roll dough so thin you can see the candlelight through it. Their laughter bounces off the tiled walls, bright and mischievous. You sit beside one girl who's brushing melted butter between the layers of pastry. What's inside, you ask? She grins. Patience and cheese. Mostly cheese. She gestures toward a copper pan where another batch sizzles. When the Valid Sultan is pleased, we serve it warm. When she's angry, we serve it faster. Historians still argue whether the harem was prison or paradise, but in this kitchen, it feels like a republic of laughter and scent. Everyone has a task, a story, and a spoon. A few women hum an old Anatolian lullaby while chopping herbs. Others debate whether dill belongs in burek at all. It's a matter of diplomacy, one says gravely. Add too much, and you insult mint. One corner of the room glitters with glass jars, rose jam, apricot preserves, candied orange peel. The Sultan's favorites, a cook explains, but they also go into our letters. You raise an eyebrow. Letters? She leans closer, voice low. When we send gifts or messages to other palaces, we hide them in the sweets. Words taste better that way. You imagine a tray of sugared apricots crossing the palace, carrying gossip disguised as dessert. It's espionage wrapped in honey. Once, she continues, a rival sent the wrong jam. Too sour. That feud lasted 3 years. The older woman from before checks the oven, squints and mutters, needs one more story. She pulls the burek out anyway, golden and flaking, and breaks off a corner for you. The cheese stretches like silk. Eat, she commands. Food here is confession. Between bites, you notice how seamlessly affection and authority blend here. One moment they tease, the next they organize with military precision. When a servant arrives breathless, announcing that the Valid Sultan requests rose sherbet for the afternoon audience, the whole kitchen shifts into harmony. Spoons, pitchers, petals, sugar. Everyone moves as if to music. They pour the sherbet into crystal flasks and float a few jasmine blossoms on top. The scent fills the air, sweet, floral, faintly melancholy. For diplomacy, one of the women says, a good sherbet keeps the peace longer than an army. She adds softly, and sweeter too. You ask if they ever send food beyond the palace. Sometimes, the elder says, to the poor during Ramadan, or to widows on Fridays. But mostly we send comfort to one another. She points to a tray of pastries arranged in circles. Each woman bakes for her friends on her birthday. The trick is not to say who made which, so envy can't find its way in. The younger cooks giggle. Envy always finds its way in. One whispers, we just feed it until it naps. Historians still debate the role of women in shaping palace cuisine, whether they influenced recipes or simply enjoyed them. But standing here, watching the women fold stories into pastry, you understand the truth is simpler. They cooked their way into history, one bite at a time. A girl named Isel beckons you toward the window where light filters through latticework, painting her hands in honeycomb shadows. She's slicing quince for jam. My mother taught me this, she says. She said every fruit has a season. And every heart has one too. If you boil it gently, both last longer. She drops the slices into a pot, the syrup hissing softly, and you swear the air around her glows gold. Quirky tidbit. One jar on the shelf bears a label that reads Jam for Forgotten Birthdays. You ask. Aisel smiles. We make it from leftover fruit. Anyone who feels unseen gets a spoonful. You laugh, touched by the kindness disguised as sweetness. So it's emotional medicine. She nods. Exactly. But don't tell the apothecary. He'll want to write it down. They hand you a tiny cup of sherbet, rose and lemon, cool and perfumed. You sip, and it tastes like secrets told kindly. For a moment, everything slows. The clatter of spoons softens, the laughter stretches into warmth. The scent of pastry lingers like memory. Then, as quickly as it began, the kitchen wakes again. Trays are packed, the flasks wrapped in silk, and a messenger disappears through the curtain with a final bow. The elder woman wipes her hands, sighs, and says, "Now we eat before the next demand arrives. Empires run on hungry men, but they rest on full women." You smile. The line feels ancient and true. As you leave, the young cooks wave, their fingers dusted with flour and sugar. Behind them, the air hums with laughter, perfume, and heat. You glance back once more, at the jars, the barek, the quiet revolution of kindness, and think, the empire may rise on power, but it endures on generosity. Outside, the corridor feels colder without their warmth. You carry the scent of rose sherbet with you, faint but defiant, like a promise whispered through silk. Ahead, the palace corridors grow dim again, echoing with distant footsteps and the low murmur of foreign words. Change is coming, an age of porcelain, forks, and silence. You follow the sound, feeling the taste of sweetness fade into something else entirely. The palace feels different now. The laughter of the harem fades behind you, replaced by the hush of polished floors and the faint click of imported shoes. The scent of cinnamon and rosewater gives way to something sharper: varnish, candle wax, a hint of ink. Change is in the air and it smells faintly European. You wander past tall windows draped in damask, where foreign guests sit stiffly with porcelain cups. The tea is pale, delicate, poured from English kettles instead of Ottoman brass. Forks glint where fingers once ruled. The old copper trays have been pushed aside in favor of plates from Vienna, thin as apology. You can feel the kitchens, those vast breathing lungs, holding themselves still. In one corner, an apprentice polishes a fork as though it were a relic. "We used to have one spoon for soup and one for everything else," he mutters. "Now we have 12 kinds of guilt." He sets the fork down and sighs. The new ambassadors say this is refinement. Historians still argue whether this shift, this Europeanization of the Ottoman palate, was evolution or erosion. The truth, as always, simmers somewhere in between. It began with curiosity. Foreign envoys offering French pastries, Viennese chocolates, English puddings. Then it became fashion, then policy. Porcelain replaced copper. Butter began whispering where olive oil once sang, and silence began to replace song. You enter the Helvehane again, but it's quieter now. The old candy masters move slower, their hands heavy with memory. One stirs syrup in a brass pot that no longer gleams. "We used to measure sugar by cent," he says. "Now they send it in boxes with numbers." His apprentice, barely 20, pipes cream into a tray of eclairs. "They call these alla franga tatlissa," the old man mutters. "Frankish sweets. Too soft, too proud." He offers you one anyway. It's light, pleasant, empty in a way you can't quite name. "Does it taste like victory?" he asks. You shake your head. "No," you say softly. "It tastes like forgetting." Outside in the courtyards, the call to prayer still threads through the air, but it competes now with the distant clatter of marching boots. The empire's borders are shrinking, its kitchens reorganizing, its menus rewritten to suit new tongues. The Sultan dines from porcelain, but the workers' bowls have grown shallower. You find the spice master again, older now, his beard gone to snow. He stands before shelves that seem sparser than before. "We still grind cinnamon," he says, "but the merchants sell us less. They say Europe pays more." He gestures at the empty jars. An empire fades first through its spices. The tongue forgets before the map does. A faint humor flickers in his eyes. Historians still argue whether the fall began with politics or palate. I say it began when someone thought pepper was just pepper. You follow him into the courtyard, where copper pots lie stacked like fallen soldiers. The air smells of rain and resignation. "We still cook," he says, "but now they call it nostalgia." You sit on the edge of a fountain, listening to the rhythm of water. Around you, the ghosts of flavor whisper, the rose sherbet, the soup, the bread, the coffee. They speak in a language softer than loss, a language that remembers. One cook walks by carrying a porcelain tureen filled with consommé, clear, refined, French. He bows politely. The Sultan's new favorite, he says. You peer inside. It's beautiful, yes, but it looks lonely. No lentils? You ask. He smiles. No laughter either. He leaves, and you're left alone with the smell of rain and the echo of spoons that used to clink against copper. For the first time, the palace kitchens feel cold. You remember the gardener's story about the Sultan who planted a pear tree after defeat, because even failure deserved shade. Maybe this too is a kind of planting, a bitter seed of change that will bloom in another age. The Ottomans, after all, taught the world to blend, to borrow, to spice the unfamiliar. Perhaps, somewhere in this twilight, a new flavor waits to be born. As the evening deepens, a bell tolls from the upper courtyard. The cooks begin to clean for the night, their movements slow but sure. The old candy master hums a tune you've heard before, from the days of rose and sugar and youth. You close your eyes and listen. It's out of time, off-key, and perfect. When you open them again, the moon hangs over Topkapı like a drop of milk in the dark. The city breathes beyond the walls, carrying the smell of bread, smoke, and coffee. Still coffee. The empire may change its plates, but it hasn't yet changed its dreams. You rise, brushing a dusting of flour from your sleeve. Somewhere a cat darts between the shadows, a small continuity with a full belly. The last cook leaves, carrying a lamp that flickers, fades, and finally steadies. And there, in the hush that follows, you hear it again. The quiet heart of the palace still beating in the kitchens, still warm beneath all that porcelain. Tomorrow, the fire will light again. Morning in modern Istanbul begins with sound. Not drums, not the ring of copper lids, or the hiss of palace cauldrons, just the mingled calls of fairies and the murmur of cafe grinders opening their metal throats. You stand at a street corner where the Bosphorus blushes in sunrise and realize the old empire never left. It merely learned new shoes. Steam rises from a vendor's cart, simmet stacked like edible halos, sesame ticking against the griddle. The smell is the same as it was centuries ago when the bakers of dawn sang to their fires. A man tears a ring in half, dips it into tea as dark as memory, and hums under his breath. Across the street, a boy sells roasted chestnuts, their shells cracking open like punctuation marks in a slow story. You bite into one. It's sweet, smoky, and familiar, in a way no passport could explain. You walk toward the spice bazaar, through alleys where the air smells like every century at once. Pyramids of saffron, cinnamon sticks tied with string, sumac glimmering like crushed rubies. Each spice a word from the empire's lost conversation. The vendors call out, not in the courtly hush of Topkapı, but with the musical impatience of the city that inherited its appetite. Abi, come smell history, one shouts, waving a scoop of cardamom. You do, and the scent is instantly Ottoman. Sweet, medicinal, arrogant, forgiving. Inside the bazaar, a shopkeeper pours you a sample of rose sherbet from a plastic jug. Old recipe, he says proudly. You taste it. Cool, perfumed, and maybe a bit too sugary. He grins. People like it sweeter now. Life's too bitter, eh? You laugh softly. If only the confectioners of the Helvehane could hear him. They'd approve the joke, at least. You find a stall where a woman sells dolma, vine leaves stuffed with rice, pine nuts, and currants. She hums as she works, her hands quick and sure. My grandmother taught me this, she says, from her grandmother who cooked for the pashas. She folds the leaves with the same gesture the palace cooks used, the twist of the wrist, the firm tuck of confidence. When you bite one, the taste is balanced. Lemon's brightness, rice's warmth, a whisper of cinnamon. Time collapses neatly in your mouth. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman kitchen vanished or evolved. But walking here, you can tell it didn't vanish at all. It spilled, like soup too full for one bowl, down the hill into every neighborhood, every family kitchen, every coffee house. The empire's recipes went underground, hidden aprons in memory, re-emerged on street corners and in home kitchens where nobody uses measuring spoons, but everything tastes right. At a cafe, a waiter sets down a plate of lentil soup and a slice of lemon. You smile. Chorba again, the beginning of every meal, the warm punctuation of belonging. He notices your grin. My mother says you can judge a city by its soup, he says. You nod. Then Istanbul is very old and very kind. You take a walk by the water. Fishermen line the bridge, casting their lines into the same current that once fed the Sultan's tables. Buckets gleam with bluefish, anchovy, mackerel. The Bosphorus still whispering its argument with the Marmara. A fisherman offers you one for luck. Catch and release, he says. The fish come back to check on us. Maybe they do. The sea remembers who eats gently. Further inland, the bakeries bloom with smell. You watch a young woman pull trays of pied from the oven, the loaves freckled with sesame and black cumin. She sprinkles a few extra seeds on top and shrugs when you ask why. For blessing, she says. My grandmother said each seed carries a prayer for tomorrow. She smiles. We're still superstitious about good bread. You think of Ilyas and the Guild of Cats. Some traditions, it seems, travel by paw prints. The cafes are full of students now, their laptops glowing where ink pots once stood. They sip Turkish coffee thick enough to stand a spoon, then flip the cups to read their fortunes in the grounds. This one says, I'll marry rich. A girl laughs. Mine says, I'll sleep through exams. Her friend replies. Even their jokes echo the old empire's mix of faith and mischief. Somewhere the coffee master who feared rebellion is smiling into his beard. Quirky tidbit appears on a menu board chalked in English and Turkish. Ottoman smoothie. Rose, yogurt. Honey, date. You order it, expecting irony. Instead, it tastes ancient, like a milkshake that read poetry before dawn. You imagine the Hekambasha nodding in approval, murmuring something about balancing humors through breakfast. The city hums. Tram bells replace caravan bells. Delivery bikes replace horse carts. But behind every restaurant door, some echo of Topkapı lingers, a trace of cumin, the rhythm of ladles, the unspoken rule that you never send a guest away hungry. Historians still argue whether the empire ended in 1922 or whether it merely changed uniforms. You suspect the kitchens never noticed the paperwork. They just kept feeding whoever was hungry enough to listen. As the evening slides back in, the call to prayer threads through the honking cars and the chatter of cafes. Lights blink on along the Bosphorus, turning the water into a mirror of stars. You sit on a stone step with a paper cone of roasted chickpeas, the cities hum around you like a lullaby composed by centuries. You think of the palace, the soup and sherbet, the bread and laughter, the physicians measuring joy with spoons. You think of the women behind the curtains, the bakers of dawn, the fishmongers arguing about loyalty and seas. You realize the empire never really fell. It was simply digested. One meal, one story, one kindness at a time. A cat curls at your feet. You break off a bit of simit and offer it. She eats politely, then looks up as if to say, all this for dinner. Lucky humans. The breeze from the water carries salt, sugar, and something older, the quiet memory of kitchens that once fed an empire and now feed its ghosts. You let the sound of ferries blur into the rhythm of your breathing. Somewhere behind your eyelids, the copper domes of Topkapı still gleam, the ovens glow, and a single ladle dips into soup meant for everyone. The taste of rose and lemon still lingers on your tongue. And now, as the last lights of the city fade, you let the story settle, like the steam after a long day in the kitchen. The bustle, the laughter, the arguments over saffron and sesame, all of it softens into the hush that follows a shared meal. You picture the palace from above, its courtyards dim, its fires low but still alive beneath the ash. The cooks have gone home, the apprentices dream of perfect dough, and even the cats, full and dignified, sleep in the warmth of old stories. Each breath you take smells faintly of something you've met tonight. Bread crust and rosewater, the memory of the sea, the calm sweetness of lentils and mint. You realize that food is just time you can taste. Centuries reduced to a single comfort between heartbeat and silence. If you listen closely, the sounds return in miniature. A wooden spoon tapping a pot, a kettle sighing, someone humming an old Anatolian tune about love and soup. It becomes the pulse beneath your breath. Let it all drift now. Let the ships move quietly along the Bosphorus, their lanterns winking like patient stars. Let the wind smooth the water, and let your thoughts float somewhere between the spice market and the sky. You are full. You are safe. The kitchens have closed their doors, but they've left the light on for you. Sleep well, traveler. Tomorrow waits with new bread, new coffee, and another gentle story from history's table.